Everyone's seen this at some point. You're scrolling through some kind of online content or maybe reading an email, and you encounter a paragraph it's beautiful. It's articulate. It uses words like paramount and nuanced and interconnected with the kind of effortless grace that makes you just nod in agreement. It feels right and it sounds right. In fact, it's so smooth that you don't even realize you haven't actually processed the logic behind it. You've just experienced the vibe of truth. But here's the really tough part. What if that perfectly polished paragraph is completely hollow? What if the eloquence masks some error or a complete lack of substance? We're entering an era where the appearance of clarity is becoming a lot easier to manufacture than actual clarity itself. As AI-generated content floods our screens, we aren't just facing a problem of misinformation. We're facing a shift in how we use our brains. We're moving from a culture of active inquiry to a culture of passive consumption. We confuse smoothness for truth. So today I want to talk about the snowball effect. It's the snowball effect of unexamined assumptions and why our brains are biologically wired to kind of fall for this trick. And also how we can use technology not as a substitute for thought, but as a tool to create friction for our thoughts. So let's start with the snowball effect. When you encounter an idea that's really easy to digest, something that presents itself with some kind of immediate, surface level clarity, your brain does something really efficient. It accepts it. You don't feel the need to interrogate a well-formed listicle or a really well-crafted summary. But here's where the danger lies. Every time we accept an idea without examining its underlying logic, we add another layer to our mental model of the world. One unexamined assumption leads to a second, which leads to a third. Before you know it, you haven't just accepted a single falsehood. You've built an entire worldview on a foundation of polished but very hollow assumptions. This creates a cultural shift toward passive consumption. We stop being active participants in building our world, and we start being spectators. We aren't looking for truth anymore. We're just looking for something that sounds like truth. It's not necessarily because people are becoming less intelligent. It's because the cost of accepting an unexamined idea has dropped to almost zero. So why is this so hard to resist? Why can't we just be smarter? Well, a big reason is that the technology isn't actually attacking our logic. It's exploiting our biology. Algorithms and influencers, they don't need to be right. They just need to trigger 3 very specific cognitive biases that are embedded in us. First, there's authority bias. We have a hardwired tendency to attribute competence and correctness to anything that sounds authoritative. When an artificial intelligence uses formal syntax, structured headings, and academic jargon, our brains reflexively say, hey, this sounds like a professor. Must be true. Second, there's the fluency effect. This is a big one. Human beings tend to judge the truth of a statement based on how easy it is to process. If a sentence is smooth, sounds rhythmic, flows well, our brain perceives it as more true than a clunky, difficult to read sentence. Even if the clunky sentence contains much more accurate information, smoothness signals truth. And then third, there's cognitive ease. This is that really pleasant, relaxed feeling you get when something makes sense immediately. When an AI provides a neat, summarized conclusion, it creates a sense of completeness. There's no mental itch left to scratch. The loop's closed. And because our brains are biologically programmed to conserve energy, we much prefer the ease of a finished thought over the struggle of an unfinished one. The technology isn't breaking these biases. It's just providing them with high-octane fuel. Now, don't get me wrong. Heuristics, that's these mental shortcuts, they're actually kind of brilliant. They're the reason that you can drive a car while you think about what to have for dinner without having to manually calculate the friction of your tires on the road. To get through each day, we need to conserve mental energy. Historically, the bottleneck in communication was the effort required to create clear ideas and to communicate them. You had to think, you had to write, you had to structure. The work happened at the source. But with generative AI and other technological advances, that bottleneck is flipped. The production of polished prose is now instantaneous and it's essentially free. We no longer have a shortage of clarity. We have a shortage of scrutiny. Instead of the challenge of being, how do I express this idea clearly? The new challenge has actually become, how do I resist accepting this idea too quickly? The very tools that make communication more efficient are acting as an amplifier for misinformation and cognitive biases because they allow errors and biases to be wrapped in high quality packaging that we don't even notice the rot inside. This leads to something we can call intellectual smoothing. We think that the collapse of truth will be some kind of explosive event, a sudden dramatic moment where lies become the norm. Think like 1984. But in reality, it's more likely to be a lot quieter than that. It's a gradual flattening. As we rely on these tools to summarize, paraphrase, and clean up our thoughts, language becomes uniform. Explanations become confident, even though they lack accuracy. The nuance is sanded down because nuance is friction, and friction is hard to process. The result of all this is a society where the ideas appear sound, stable, and consistent, but they lack depth. We may be at risk of entering an era of profound intellectual stagnation, where we grow less aware of our own ignorance because the tools we use are designed to hide it from us. It's a world of high gloss, low substance thought. So where does that leave us? Is artificial intelligence destined to be the agent of our intellectual decline? Not necessarily. The tool itself is neutral. It's how we engage with it that matters. There's two distinct modes of use. Mode one is artificial intelligence as a substitute. This is elevator mode. You want to get to the top floor without doing any of the work. You use AI to think for you. You let it summarize, decide, conclude. In this mode, The technology erodes your critical thinking because you're effectively outsourcing reasoning. But then there's a second mode, artificial intelligence as friction. This is, if the other one's the elevator mode, this is the take the stairs mode. In this mode, you use the tool to challenge yourself. You ask it, what are the counter arguments to my current position? Or where is the logical gap in this paragraph I just wrote? Instead of letting the AI provide the answer, you use its output kind of as a sparring partner. When it's used actively, AI can actually increase the friction in your thought process, prompting a much deeper analysis rather than replacing analysis. The rare but a really incredibly valuable way to live in an AI-rich world is to learn how to practice deliberate resistance. So how do we actually do that? The answer is fairly simple, actually. It lies in a skill called metacognition. Metacognition is simply thinking about your own thinking. It's the ability to step back and observe your own mental processes. When you read something that feels incredibly satisfying, something that hits all those notes of fluency and authority, the metacognitive response is to ask, why am I believing this? Is it because the logic is sound? Or just because the prose is so smooth? By questioning the surface appeal of a title, an argument, or even your own immediate reaction to some piece of content, you create a feedback loop. You're basically building a manual override for those cognitive biases we talked about earlier. You're teaching yourself to recognize when you're being lulled into cognitive ease. If we fail to develop this metacognitive muscle, the danger isn't necessarily a loss of intelligence. We aren't going to suddenly become stupid. The real danger is a reduction in engagement. We're shifting from a state of saying, I understand this, to a state of saying, I recognize when something sounds right. There's a massive psychological difference between these two statements. The first implies an active construction of meaning inside your mind. The second implies a passive recognition of a pattern. If we lose the habit of deep engagement in idea formation, we become incredibly susceptible to manipulation. We become a society that can be moved by anyone who knows how to polish their prose just enough to trigger our fluency reflex. Now I know some of you are thinking, isn't this just the same old story? And honestly, yeah, you're right. Every major communication revolution has sparked an identical anxiety about the demise of depth and truth. When the printing press arrived, people worried that the sheer volume of books would destroy our ability to memorize and to focus. When the internet exploded, we feared that the information overload would make critical filtering impossible. And granted, it did make it more difficult. And yet, every time humanity has tried to adapt, we didn't stop thinking. We changed how we think. We developed new forms of literacy and new ways to navigate through all the noise. The question isn't whether people will think less. It's whether we can learn to think differently in an environment where friction has been completely removed. But there's a modern twist here that makes this era unique. It's moral outsourcing. When we encounter problems like AI generated misinformation or bias, or other tools of technology can generate those same things, our first instinct is to blame the tool. We call for more verification laws, better filters, and more automated moderation. There's a huge danger in layering these systems on top of each other. It creates something called choice architecture, a way of nudging behavior without actually engaging judgment. If we rely solely on external filters to tell us what's true, what's right, and what's wrong, we're not actually becoming more critical thinkers. We're just moving the responsibility from our brains to an algorithm. We're diffusing accountability until no one, not even ourselves, is responsible for the truth. A healthy intellectual ecosystem requires a two-pronged approach. On one hand, we need measurable external safeguards. Yeah, we'll need regulation to prevent the intentional, manipulative use of AI or other technology tools to deceive. We also need transparency in how AI models are trained. But on the other hand, and far more importantly, we need the cultivation of our own internal critical faculties. No amount of external regulation can protect a society that's lost the ability to challenge its own assumptions. Over-reliance on automated verification creates a false sense of security. It leaves us completely vulnerable when those systems inevitably fail or get bypassed. So where's the sweet spot? How do we live in this new world without losing ourselves? We don't have to live a life of digital asceticism. The goal is to use technology as a friction point. Don't use AI to reach the conclusion faster. Use it to test your path to your conclusion. Use it to generate the devil's advocate position. Seek out the complexity that the smoothness is trying to hide. The most important skill you can develop in an era of effortless clarity is the ability to slow down when things feel too easy. Don't let the polish fool you. The truth is rarely found in how smoothly a sentence flows, but in how deeply it holds up under pressure. Thanks for watching. If this made you stop and think, literally, then maybe we're on the right track. Consider clicking that subscribe button for more content like this. I'll see you in the next one. Take good care.
People dancing with the stars, spandex gym suits, smoothie bars, old hippies living the good life, singing we shall not be moved. Occupiers so frustrated, give them money, they're sedated. Ain't no shovel big enough to dig us out of here. Everybody wears an apple. The biggest thought with which they grapple is, can I find me an app somewhere that'll tell me who I am?